It's Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf. Look for it on video cassette and DVD.
Granny, a werewolf! Oh no! Oh no! I'm a werewolf!
You hear that, Mr. Twiddle? Sounded like a wild animal.
Stop myself.
What's wrong? Daddy want some?
Well, let's make like shovels and dig in. Scooby-Dooby-Doo!
I'm an alpha now.
Goddamn force of nature. I feel like I could do just about anything.
Welcome to the pack, Alpha!
So, werewolves. If you've seen any video essay covering the history of vampires in media, you will eventually hear a huge mention of Twilight. But a topic that I think goes underlooked when examining the ripple effect of Twilight is the popularity of werewolves. And I think most people are familiar with werewolves in some form of the concept, whether it's someone turning into hybrid creatures in ancient folklore or old movies about men or women becoming hybrid dog creatures. Furries, the colloquial term. But no matter how you learned about what a werewolf is, I think the consensus was that the werewolf is a bad creature. Never become one, because it's essentially a curse that'll isolate you from normal society and force you to succumb to your innate animal instincts. So again, a furry. And I think Twilight was the first of its kind to paint werewolves, especially werewolf boys, to be tortured souls who have to struggle with their inner animalistic instincts and possessive angst over their love interests. I mean, I have to admit, it did popularize a more systematic look into how werewolf families would interact with each other. Also a lot of werewolf erotica. So there's that. Now, while I'm sure Twilight wasn't the first example of a more interpersonal, empathetic perspective of werewolves, it's undeniable that this was the catalyst for a wave into a much softer peek into the lives of not only one person with the werewolf curse, but now we can speculate how relationship dynamics would work if everyone was a werewolf. We can assign different werewolves to be alphas and betas. We can speculate about how mating would work and what smells would indicate what another werewolf was feeling. We can see how emotions would clash with instinct. And for the record, I do know that all of this behavior based on studying actual wolves is not true. The man who speculated that concept of werewolf packs played around with an idea he later retracted, not knowing he essentially invented a subgenre of gay porn. But in more popular forms of media, we've seen werewolf packs played around in shows like Teen Wolf and Hemlock Grove. Actually, there's not a lot of things that I can really think of right now. Unfortunately, I think vampires will just always reign supreme. I don't know, I'm not like other supernatural creature enthusiasts. I like the furries. But every example of anything where werewolves mostly has them as a footnote within that universe. That's just something I've noticed. Yeah, they're there. Like, the Vampire Diaries just gave up after their one werewolf character just stopped being one and instead became like a hybrid vampire werewolf. You know what? It's a whole thing. The point is, werewolves and wolf pack drama, although popularized by Twilight to be more sympathetic, still have their stories saved for the occasional Teen Wolf show or your ABO fic. And boy, am I glad I don't have to explain what ABO is, because the werewolf series I've been reading is not ABO, but even though I thought it was, but it is still very gay and is still very much a glimpse into the pheromone heavy world of werewolf boys and wolf packs. Pack. The Green Creek series. So, if you're like me and you developed a taste for highly specific media niches, then I don't think it's a surprise why I want to talk about this. I mean, like, what else am I supposed to do with this knowledge? Seriously. Like, there is no other option for me at this point. But for posterity's sake, TJ Klune's body of work has been my latest fascination. And from my research, TJ is a currently best-selling author who seems to have started in more indie publishing circles. The way I see it is TJ has found a niche for himself in writing gay romance fiction with novels he first released and wrote as ebooks with the option to buy physical copies through Amazon or select bookstores. And I imagine since genre fiction, especially gay genre fiction, has been in little demand in the mainstream with small, more contemporary successes like Love Simon, Heartstopper, and Red, White, and Royal Blue, movie coming out soon. I might make a video about that, depending on how bad or good the movie is. This is the most accessible route to find any success and notoriety within the industry, at least for now. I mean, at the time of recording, this first kill has been released, making it one of the first queer genre adaptations of a supernatural vampire drama without an explicit focus on queerness itself. It's also one of the fastest queer genre adaptations to be cancelled. We're setting new records, people. I mean, at this point, I think the lesbians have the vampires and the gays have the werewolves, which I think makes a sort of cosmic sense. Here's praying we get a Green Creek adaptation. Netflix. Actually, no, not Netflix. Not after what they did to First Kill. But it seems his publishing has paid off for TJ's career since his release of House of the Cerulean Sea. Wait, I never double-checked if that's the actual... Okay, it's The House in the Cerulean Sea. All right, we're professionals. But that book has been his most widely known book as far as I know. I mean, at least from what I know, from what I can tell when I saw it in my neighborhood Target. And my experience with TJ Klune's books have only been one other book, Into This River I Drown, which has been out since the day I'm going to put on the screen. And it immediately sounded like my kind of shit. Because I'm willing to admit that I am an avid lover of romance fiction, but I find most straight romances to be a bit dull. Not saying that there aren't exceptions. I just think after many, many years of stories capitalizing on romances between man and a woman, not a lot you can do anymore to stand out. That's why I think the shows that I did mention, and most likely others, had such a success, and why I wanted to read Into This River. It was angsty, it had gay angels and supernatural hijinks, and it was just unapologetically romantic. And after I finished it, I of course dug a bit deeper and found that TJ wrote an entire 4-book supernatural series about gay werewolves called the Green Creek series. And when I realized that, my immediate thought was, oh, ABO. So then I decided to voluntarily put myself in the position to know exactly what we're dealing with here. Because I've never read anything about heat cycles and mating rituals of betas and omegas and mpreg, but boy was I fully prepared to. And sadly, like I said before, this series doesn't have any of that. There's no mpreg or nodding. But I was still surprised by how invested I was in the werewolf politics and the romantic tension between most of the pairings. So as an outlet, I guess I wanted to make a guide of sorts for the future when I want to look back on what this was and why I read it and what I thought of it at the time. I just need to get this out of my system. Like, has your werewolf romance questioned the systems of werewolf government that parallel real-world systems of outdated monarchy and tradition, while also showcasing the most nuanced relationships between men of varying sexual identities and backgrounds? Probably not. Let's lay some groundwork, shall we? Before I want to get into spoilers, despite this not necessarily being a plot recap, spoilers will get more in-depth for the lore, future characters, and their relationships with other people. I wanted to give that warning because I thought it'd be fun to establish a little werewolf world building before I talk about each book. And I think anyone's immediate assumption, even if they never heard of ABO, is that a story revolving around werewolf pack drama would have the male-dominated hierarchy of alphas, betas, and omegas. And you wouldn't be wrong. That's for sure here. But there's a little bit more to it than that for this series. TJ was not afraid to play around with some lycanthrope lore to great angsty effect. For example, in this world, there are mates, but there are also tethers. So while mates are a big deal and require the exchange of hand-carved stone wolves and bite marks, tethers function differently. Tethers don't require any ritual exchange and are essentially a deeply personal bond that can be established romantically, platonically, and even familially. Mates and siblings can be tethers, but siblings can't be mates. At least I hope not. And while mates require more physical displays of proof, tethers are more of an emotional or spiritual connection to another person. The most these bonds function is probably as a sort of anchor to keep a pack member from being led astray and encouraged a collective system of survival. Become too disconnected from your tether and you could end up as an omega. Now, while alphas, betas, and omegas are an established hierarchy, it isn't as simple as every wolf pack for themselves as long as they have an alpha. There's a system in place where being an alpha basically gives you an inherent power and right to rule over not just an individual pack, but other packs as well. You have red eyes and essentially have the mystical authority to sense what everyone's thinking and feeling in your pack, along with the potential to forcibly affect the behavior of other wolves. The pack Green Creek centers itself around is one of those higher ranking packs and is considered the werewolf royal family, the Bennets. And being an alpha in general is something that can only be passed down magically when an alpha dies. But before any wolf can be given that power, they're considered a beta. And betas are pretty straightforward. They have orange eyes and are just your basic wolf pack member. Omegas, also a thing. They have violet eyes and are framed more as wolves who don't have packs. And in this world, being an omega, if you're not used to it, has you go through a sort of withdrawal process where you become mentally unstable the longer you don't have a pack or tether. Within this universe, there are two established magical creatures, witches and werewolves. The wolves in this series function the same as in Twilight. One minute you got a regular person on two legs, and bam, an explosion of ripped clothes, and we got a ginormous werewolf in place. Except in this universe, they do have a middle shift that I always imagine as either that dated special effects look of prosthetics and teeth, which I'm always here for, or that cheap spirit Halloween costume. And while witches exist, I don't feel like going too in-depth with how their magic works. The books basically take a mostly naturistic framing of witches with ties to the land and the elements, but is overall left to be a very loose depiction. I love witches, but I'm not an expert. I just love anyone's attempt at portraying them, regardless of how accurate the depiction is. Forgive me if I'm not strict about how witchcraft is portrayed, but I was happy that they were there at all. Otherwise, I think the books would have gotten a bit stale if all I read for 4 books were the mating bonds between furries. Luckily in this series, witches serve as a sort of advisor role to high prominent packs. They help with any issue that magic can fix or mend, basically. They can build wards and develop their own impact bonds with the wolves. These witches can also have their own notoriety alongside these packs. For the Bennets, their witch family is the Livingstones. And to help make sense of all of this, I made a family tree. It took a lot of stock photo googling and way too much free time. And no, I will not explain why I chose these pictures. Some are how I imagine the characters based on little fan art and descriptions, and others are just because the vibes seem right. Gordo is one of the major Livingstone characters within the series, just a heads up. And I think to explain the timeline and structure of the series and how it got published, I think I would compare it a lot to Bridgerton. We have an established world focusing on the romantic drama of each member of a core family, with each book serving as that family member's narrative arc or romantic subplot. But something I think Green Creek does well with this format is that even though these books have different characters and voices and distinct arcs, there are running plots throughout all 4 of them throughout the series, with different threats and villains set up in one book and paid off in another. And it's aspects like these that don't make the series feel like pure fluff or ubiquitous, and I'd love it if more trashing romance novels did this. Like, imagine if the next season of Bridgerton planted a future plotline where all the romantic pairings teamed up to defend their livelihoods against a common enemy who just hates love and friendship. Wolfsong. So this one is Joe and Ock's book, and it's good. I know I put this one as my least favorite, but that is a completely opinionated take I have. Most of the books are written pretty well, with consistent quality throughout all 4, I'd say. They all very much feel like one consistent vision, despite having 4 different protagonists. But I think I put this one at the bottom because I found myself way more invested in the other pairings, aside from Ox and Joe, and they don't get much more fleshed out till later books, so while I still found this one unexpectedly enjoyable, I'd still skip it if I ever felt like rereading the entire series. Plus, I just really don't have a lot to say about it. It was just really long, way longer than I expected. It has like 3 different type skips just in the first chunk. And I read this entire series through audio, and every time something dramatic and life-altering would happen, this had to mean the book was going to end, right? But whenever I looked down at the runtime, I still haven't even reached the halfway mark in a 20-plus hour audiobook. But as an indie-published first book in a series, it was way more high quality than I expected. It was clearly trying to be more than what it was on the surface. Usually less is more for me when it comes to what I can tolerate, but the more here really fleshed out a lot of the characters and didn't waste much time focusing on anything else besides the main drama, while still setting up future threats and characters. Ravensong. So, this one's my favorite. I don't know if you could tell, but this book immediately clicked better with me than the first one, because if you compare the two, the first is everything you want in a sappy, angsty werewolf romance through Ox and Joe. But this one goes in a completely different direction by following Gordo and Mark, who already had an implied history. And Gordo is the complete and utter asshole to all the werewolves, and I love him. He's just this emotionally bitter witch who hates everything but still has to tolerate the wolves, especially Mark. He's like the last of the living stones, and it's just so much more captivating to me. It's also just captivating enough to read through his perspective and recontextualize everything good and noble about the werewolves in the first book through someone who justifiably hates them. In this book, we get to see how their traditional ways caused Gordo just a lot of justified grief and drama and tore his relationship with Mark apart. The entire book is his petty, bitter, and lonesome perspective, and I loved it. I think there's just something about reading through the eyes of an asshole that fleshes out not just the plot, but just the tone of the series itself. Wolfsong is exactly what you expect when I tell you that this series has angsty, sad werewolf boys. But this book is like a spit in the face to that. And yes, a very sexually charged spit to the face. It's just not what I expected from a second book in a series like this. I'm so used to following one protagonist for so long and being stuck with them and being so much more invested in the side characters. And this series avoided that. And with how much of it there is, it made getting through this series a lot easier. So even if you thought the first book was corny or just too sappy, like, at least get to the second one. And I have a feeling if the series was more popular, everyone would agree this was like the black sheep and no one would love it. But I love it. I think that's very evident. Heartsong. Heartsong is the third book, and it certainly is the third book. Getting to this step in reading the series and getting to Heartsong was when I thought TJ Klune was testing me. Because by no means did I think this book was egregiously bad. It's better than Wolfsong. But when you get to this one, you learn it's not really clear who's going to be the next perspective character. Even though I explained how each book follows different pairings from the same family, Ravensong is a missing beat in that pattern. Because not only is it from the perspective of someone who is estranged from that family, the love interest is not one of the three brothers. So by the time I got to Heartsong, I had zero idea which brother was next, not even sure if it was going to be about a brother or who could possibly be the new perspective. And what do you know? It's Robbie. Robbie is an interesting addition to the cast, or in this case pack, to the Green Creek universe, because he's very normal. And normal in a sense that he's a beta wolf who just pops into the story in the first book and is just there. We get his backstory in this one, but it's just so tame compared to everything else going on by this point. I mean, by this point, an armada of werewolf hunters has invaded Green Creek. Meanwhile, I have to follow the amnesia subplot of a character who has had very little impact on the story so far. And again, if the series was more popular, I'm sure this one would be considered one of the better ones, but I just don't think I see it. I think I just didn't get what TJ wanted me to like about Robbie. There's a lot to like. I mean, like, he's nice. He's a pretty genial guy. It's just really boring. I mean, I think the most interesting thing about him is that he's from the East Coast, because the audio narrator gave him a New Jersey / New York, possibly Italian accent. And in this one, he's paired with Kelly, also the most boring brother. Perfect matchup, I'd say. I mean, and that's partially a lie. Kelly is canonically asexual, which gives their dynamic one you don't see a lot. And again, very unexpected for this series with very explicit sex. And before, I had the opinion that this one was so bad that I could have easily seen this series work around this one and be a trilogy. But that's not the case anymore, because while I found this one pretty weak and slows down the pacing, it has such a high degree of focus that it's still done with as much care as the other books. And I think that's something to appreciate. I mean, TJ tried his best to make me care about Robbie and Kelly, and I did, just nowhere near as Gordo or Mark, and the next pairing that I'll be talking about. Brothersong. So this one is Carter and Gavin's book, and the last book in the series. And this one was definitely a breath of fresh air, because I was so worried after Heartsong that the quality would decrease from there, but this one redeemed my reading experience. Because not only do I like pairings, but this one culminates not just the romantic pairings, but the sibling relationships as well. Hence the title Brothersong. The shift of focus on the relationships between the brothers in this one just felt like a natural step considering how much they've all been through by this point, if you read the series, which is another thing I didn't expect to be invested in. Carter being the oldest brother was just really fleshed out in this one. Before, he just seemed to be this super straight himbo jock who just didn't really do or say much until this book, but I like him now, and it's the first book we get with a perspective from someone in the Bennets. Before, all the books were on the outside looking in, but this one ends with Carter, which I think was a smart choice. Seeing his romance with Gavin through his eyes was just really sweet. Even though Gavin is sort of this offshoot of Gordo, being that he's rougher on the edges and literally feral, it just brought me back to Ravensong, which is just always a plus at this point. And as an ending, I found it satisfying. I was mad after I was done because now I won't have anything to listen to avoid my responsibilities. But overall, it was good. Yeah, and again, I just don't have that much to say after that. When something is good, it's good, but there's not really much I can expand on. It's just always more interesting to talk about the bad. Speaking of which, let's do that. Weird things I notice. Now, I know bringing up this topic might raise some red flags, but I'm not here to call out TJ for weird implications in his series about wolf boys having sex. I think I can safely point out some odd stuff I noticed while I was reading, and we can all just make a quizzical, that's a little weird. Weird first thing, women. When I first started the series, I didn't really expect women to be part of the central narrative, but not because I didn't want to. It's just something I highly expect going into male pairing romances. They tend to leave women as an afterthought while the sexy boys get all the attention, and people, especially women, can have all the thoughts they want about that. I am not here to say what's wrong or right about how to write women in any kind of male-centric story. I just want to point that out because this series attempts to rectify this issue, and I think that's something else I don't see a lot. In his own words, from his very sleek personal blog, TJ says, "When I first started writing Wolfsong, I was conscious of the choices I was going to make regarding the women of the series. Too often in MM romances, or male/male romances, a female character is either relegated to the bubbly best friend or the vengeful girlfriend/wife, keeping the main characters apart. However, in Wolfsong, I wanted to have women who stood just as strong as the male characters. This is good and all, and very beneficial awareness for the right direction that stories like this need to take, but I just think it's kind of funny how TJ tried to subvert this because it's not subtle. It's like he established the gender politics being shifted one way before, and TJ just thought he could fix it by swinging the pendulum as far as he could on the other side. Let's give an example. Every time the character Jessie, I think that's her name, showed up in a scene, I always took a bet that either she was going to be here for a couple of lines and barely speak, or inevitably say something catty and man-hating about one of the male characters, or just men in general. Thank you, TJ. She sure felt like a fun girl to be around. It just got so funny whenever that happened, because it happens with any of the women who would be introduced. It became like part of a list of a drinking game. And if you're wondering what the other rules are, they are whenever someone repeats pack, 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 whenever someone says candy canes and pine cones, followed by epic and awesome, whenever Gordo says fucking werewolves, whenever Gavin says stupid Carter, and whenever someone says my alpha in a context that suggests a level of intimacy that only werewolf fiction can bring. But I already know what people who've already read the series are gonna try to tell me when I criticize the writing of the women. They're yelling at me, saying, these fictional people are yelling at me, but what about Elizabeth? She's basically treated like the queen of the werewolves. She's high-class werewolf mommy material. And my response is, you're not wrong. But when I thought about it and think back to how Elizabeth was portrayed throughout all 4 books, she was treated with this kind of air of ethereal respect and nobility that almost excluded her from being treated like anyone else. Elizabeth in the books is more of a figurehead rather than a character with their own inner world. Sure, she is the woman with the most page time, and a lot of that page time shows how strong she is as a queen and a mother, but everything about her revolves around what every other man says and thinks of her, and what she thinks and says about every other man around her. Her sons idolize her, she idolizes them, her husband idolizes her, and she idolizes him. She barely has any scenes where she's talking to another woman, and I bet the few scenes there are, she's never talking about anything else besides another man. And the only other woman that she does talk to and considers a friend dies in the first book, and it's only her and Jessie for 3 books. And I'm pretty sure most of their conversations include some kind of comment about about how men are trash. It's like the opposite of like those writing memes that poke fun at how men write women with so much gratuitous male gaze. And here it's like the girl boss version of it. And you think Lovesong, the short story he released after the series, would flesh things out a bit, but I don't think it did. I think TJ really liked the idea of Elizabeth's character and her story, but just didn't think about how much he could make her an actual person with flaws and thoughts that reflect more autonomy. And I am glad I got this instead of the tiring tropes that he mentioned, but he set out to portray women as just as important as the men, and this is just what I saw. Like, did he succeed? I don't know, but at least he went for it. POC. How do I start this one? So, based on my family tree, let's take another look at it. The Bennetts aren't a very diverse family. All that's missing in this photo is a golden retriever, which is redundant because they're wolves, but you get the point. But what's weird to me here is not that all of the main characters are white. What's weird to me here is that because all the main characters are white, it means that the characters that aren't white will noticeably not be white, which I think gives some reason for why I can talk about the character of Rico. And for context, Rico is a character I mostly haven't mentioned, mostly because I don't know if he reads the same way on paper versus audio, because again, I listened to the entire series with my ears, but the character of Rico makes up a lot of the comedic relief for the series. He's the lovable jokester that everyone finds harmless and hilarious, even while he's hitting on women. And I don't know what the Hispanic population in the Pacific Northwest where this takes place is like, but as far as this series is concerned, he's the only one there. And he is the only person of color, from what I can tell. Again, I can only tell from the audiobooks, but he is the only person of color with the most lines in the whole series. And he's clearly written to be of some Hispanic ethnicity, even though that's never really specified. And even though their race is not what makes them funny by any means, or the butt of the joke, the character was given a very, ethnic accent by the narrator. It's just hard to put into words if you don't go through 80 hours of being just the slightest bit uncomfortable whenever you do have that intense, intimate my alpha dialogue, then pops in this Hispanic funny man with an accent that the narrator was sure committed to for the entire thing.
His gaze darted around the pack gathered before him, before it landed on me. It stuttered and stuck before it fell away. I turned back toward the woods. There came the shift of bone and muscle behind me. You think I'd be used to seeing werewolves who turn into naked people by now, Rico said.
He's like the Esteban of the Green Creek universe. We're not making jokes at the expense of his race, but that line delivery sure sounds sillier coming from a foreign man, right?
I have been ordered to rid the premises of children by Mr. Mosby. Now, I could disobey him, but Mr. Mosby reminds me of my father, who was also strict, demanding Rufus and me. Oh, I miss my papa so much.
Don't be racist. And besides, we grew up together. You've seen me naked hundreds of times.
And something about it just seems so dated, and is only funny when you don't think about it too much.
Oh, thank you for saving my life, Mr. Mosby. In my country, my life now belongs to you.
And I don't know the narrator's race, and I don't know what the parameters are for audiobook narrators and how they portray characters of color. Because it's not like a radio drama where you can have other actors play other characters. It's one person doing all of the parts. And someone could have totally not read the racial coding as intense as I if they read it on paper, versus me, who had to listen to Kurt Graves attempt to sound like a middle-aged Hispanic man. So it's hard to parse out where the intentions were with this. Was it TJ? Was it the narrator just doing his job? I don't know. Either way, I found it weird. I can't believe it's not YA. After everything I've just explained, part of me is still kind of taken aback that this series isn't young adult. Like, I know that I said that there was explicit sex, but at the same time, all the angstiness, the vibes, it being about werewolves and werewolf boys, like, it's not YA. I don't know. It's just weird to me. You see, like, each of these characters go through all this in, like, their mid-30s. It's weird. Am I gonna go through that in my mid-30s? But despite everything that I've just kind of pointed out, I still stuck with the series. I mean, it's hard not to after you're already 2 books deep and have this hand-carved wooden raven. Jacob, light my raven, please. And no, I didn't make this myself. I bought it on Etsy like a sensible crazy person. But as I continue to tag and record all of my latest thoughts and fixations, I happily made space for this fictional universe. It's not every day you just stumble on a supernatural romance that completely tries its best to create a fictional world where werewolves exist and everyone is gay. And it works. I'm not kidding. Every character turns out to be some form of not straight. And it's impressive. Because it's like TJ didn't care. He said, I'm going to publish a 4-book saga about gay werewolves, and heteronormativity won't stop me from doing precisely that. The explicit gay reading is already in the fact that they're werewolves. They're creatures that live outside of the norm of society and rely on each other to find accepting family and community. None of that Harry Potter AIDS allegory shit or whatever that was. In this series, a lot of the underlying tension is the conflict between progress and tradition, and how traditional systems of pack and bond become tested and evolve as the series goes on. And even the concept of mates is not even completely tied to sexual or romantic love by the end. Platonic love becomes just as important. And it really isn't every day that you get an asexual love interest who isn't portrayed to be something stereotypical like a robot or finds sex disgusting. So as easy as it can be to poke fun at some of the sappy dialogue, I can't deny the earnest effort it must have taken to write all of this. I feel its indie publishing origins really just gave it that space to be really earnest and more unique than something marketed to a general audience. I mean, TJ clearly cared about the series enough to hire the same narrator for all 4 books and short stories. And I think he's just an example of an author who I think is at this forefront of modern notoriety strategy, of just building a small, intimate fan base and building yourself up from word of mouth with a more independent ownership of your work and self-image. And honestly, I prefer this way of advertising. I mean, it makes it easier for myself for when I have to hunt for the next book that's gonna take away way too much of my time and brain cells to understand. Plus, I don't think I'm ever just gonna find a series like this on like the New York Times bestseller list, and that's perfectly fine. I'd happily take Ravensong over all those books in a heartbeat that I'm sure my alpha can hear whenever I'm in distress. But yeah, thank you, TJ Clune. You've taken up space in my brain. I applaud any person capable of doing that, because there's a lot that goes up on here that I can't speak about. You like my werewolf shirt? I originally wanted to make like a sort of like call to action about revitalizing the wiki, because that wiki's dead. That wiki is dead in a ditch. And I wanted to be like, oh, if I make this, maybe I can be on the wiki. And then I thought, oh, that would involve me being perceived. And I don't think I can handle that kind of pressure. I really don't care if I'm on the wiki or not. But it is funny. It is funny. I do recommend like going onto the wiki and and reading the character descriptions. They're really funny. I would do it in this video, but that would just be a whole different tangent. I just wanted to talk about my werewolf porn in peace.